A Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook written by Jane. Prologue. The loneliness was a creature of its own. For 100 years it had been his shadow, a cold weight settled deep in his bones. Frederick Thorne, alpha of the Northwood Pack, respected professor of ancient histories, stood at the window of his university office, watching the autumn rain paint shimmering, transient streaks on the old glass. He saw the students below, scurrying between buildings, their lives a frantic, beautiful, fleeting rush of moments. He could smell it all on the damp air, their ambition, their cheap coffee, their anxieties, their fleeting desires. It was a cacophony of life, and he was utterly, completely alone in the middle of it. His father had told him about the bond long ago, a story told beside a roaring fire, the words a mix of warning and promise. "It is not a choice, son," the old alpha had rumbled, his voice like stones grinding together. "It is a recognition, a soul that was split at the beginning of time, finding its other half. You will walk this earth feeling only half alive until you find her. Most of us never do." Truth be told, Frederick had given up hope decades ago. He'd built a life, a fortress of intellect and duty, around the hollow space where his mate was supposed to be. He'd learned to live with the quiet ache, the feeling of being a king ruling a kingdom of ghosts. But then, something changed. As the wind shifted, it carried a new scent through the cracked seal of the old window. It was faint. So faint, he at first thought he'd imagined it. It wasn't like the other scents of campus, perfume and exhaust fumes and wet earth. No, this was different. This smelled of wild honey, ancient paper, and a clean, sharp spark like ozone after a storm. His breath caught. The alpha inside him, the great black wolf that had slept in quiet dormancy for so long, stirred. It lifted its head from its paws, its golden eyes snapping open. There. Without thinking, Frederick turned from the window. He left his office, walking through the halls of the department with a new predatory purpose that made graduate students flatten themselves against the walls to let him pass. He was following the scent, a trail more real to him than the solid floor beneath his feet. It was faint, a ghost on the air currents, but it was pulling him, a silver string tied directly to his soul. He followed it to the departmental office, to the stack of new thesis proposals that had been submitted that morning. His fingers trembled slightly as he sifted through them, his senses casting about, searching. He passed over one, then another. The scent was stronger here, clinging to the paper, a whisper of a promise. And then he found it. He lifted the folder and the scent bloomed, washing over him, a wave of pure, unadulterated recognition. It was her. Every instinct he possessed, every fiber of his being screamed her name, a name he didn't even know yet. His eyes fell upon the cover page. The proposal was titled, "The Matriarchal Power Structures in Obscure Pre-Roman Factions." A wry, humorless smile touched his lips. Of course. Beneath the title was the name of the author, the name of his other half, the name that ended a century of silence, Bianca Rossi. And just like that, everything changed. His world, once a quiet, gray expanse of waiting, exploded into vibrant, terrifying color. The hollow ache in his chest was gone, replaced by a fierce, possessive fire. She was here, in his university, in his department. Her paper was in his hands. Deep down, he knew the truth. His careful, controlled life was over. The professor was receding, and the alpha was rising to the surface, ready to burn the world down to claim what was his. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for his office assistant. "Clear my afternoon," he thought, the command already forming. "And schedule an urgent meeting with Ms. Bianca Rossi, effective immediately." The hunt had begun. The spine of the ancient book was cool and unyielding beneath her fingers. The runic marker isn't a symbol for harvest, Todd. In fact, it's a glyph for ritual sacrifice, specifically the sacrifice of a king to appease a wolf god. Bianca's voice was a low, cutting whisper in the sacred silence of the university's rare manuscripts archive, and she tapped a faded illustration of a wolf devouring a crowned figure. You'd know that if you actually read past the introduction. Todd's face flushed a blotchy, unpleasant red. It's a valid interpretation. It's a lazy one. She didn't look up from the page. Maybe it was cruel. Deep down, she knew the truth. She didn't care. His sloppy thinking reminded her too much of her mother, who lived her life based on gut feelings and tarot cards, a path that had led them through a string of repossessed homes and broken promises. Because of that, Bianca had built her entire world on a foundation of solid, verifiable fact. So, she felt no guilt. As if pulled by a string, a faint tingling sensation started on the inside of her left wrist. She glanced down at the faint, silvery scar there, a thin crescent moon she'd had for as long as she could remember. It only ever did this when she was stressed or angry. Just like that, Todd snapped his own book shut with a loud crack that made a nearby student jump. Whatever, Rossi. We'll see what Dr. Thorne thinks of your interpretation. He stalked away. Bianca allowed herself a small, tight smile. More importantly, she knew Dr. Thorne, her enigmatic and brutally exacting thesis advisor, valued precision above all else. She traced the glyph again, a faint tremor in her hand she couldn't explain. Her world was built on logic. So why did tracing the shape of a wolf feel so much like coming home? What followed was a hushed voice from behind her. Ms. Rossi? It was Mrs. Gable, the elderly archivist, her face etched with concern. Dr. Thorne's office just called. He wants to see you. Now. Her eyes darted around nervously. He said it was urgent. The air in Bianca's lungs turned to ice. Urgent? Thorne never used that word. His version of urgent was a passive-aggressive note in the margins of a paper. This was different. This was a summons. The tingling on her wrist sharpened into a dull, pulsing ache, a silent alarm bell her rational mind refused to acknowledge. Moments later, Bianca found herself outside his lecture hall, hesitating. She could hear his voice from inside, a low, resonant baritone that commanded attention without ever needing to be raised. She just wanted to get a read on his mood before walking into the lion's den. Peeking through the narrow window in the door, she saw him. Dr. Frederick Thorne wasn't just a professor. He was a presence. Tall, dressed in a tailored tweed jacket that seemed at odds with the raw intensity in his gaze, he prowled the front of the stage. He wasn't teaching, he was holding court. And so the berserker cults didn't simply mimic the savagery of the bear or the wolf. He was saying, his voice a low rumble. They believed on a cellular spiritual level that they became the beast. It was not an act of madness, but an act of ascension. He stopped, his gaze sweeping the hundreds of silent, rapt students. And then his eyes, a strange, golden hazel she'd never been able to properly define, landed directly on her, through the tiny sliver of glass. The moment their eyes locked, a jolt, hot and electric, shot down her spine. Her breath caught. Her heart skipped. For a dizzying second, the world narrowed to just his stare, intense and possessing. It felt like he was looking right through the door, through her skin, and into something deep inside her she didn't know existed. What was that? She recoiled from the door, pressing a hand to her chest. Her pulse raced. It was nothing. It had to be nothing. She hadn't slept enough. Too much caffeine. There was always a logical reason. There had to be. Still, no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of being seen, truly and completely seen, by a man who barely knew her name. Deep down, she knew the truth. That feeling scared her more than any academic critique ever could. Could you trust what you feel over what you know? The question was a dangerous whisper in her mind. With every heartbeat, her resolve hardened. She was Bianca Rossi. She dealt in facts, and the fact was, she had a meeting to attend. She smoothed down her sweater, clutched her research notes until her knuckles were white, and walked the final few feet to his office door. The nameplate was simple, stark brass: Dr. F. Thorne. Before she could move, before her courage could desert her, she raised her hand and knocked. The office was a cage of shadows and intellect. Books weren't just on shelves, they were stacked in precarious towers on the floor, their spines like vertebrae. Ancient artifacts, a Viking ceremonial axe, a collection of African masks with hollow eyes, a Roman wolf statue were displayed like trophies from forgotten wars. And through it all, his scent permeated everything. Old paper, rich leather, and something else. Something wilder, like the air after a lightning strike. He was standing by the window looking out at the darkening campus. "You wanted to see me, doctor?" Her voice trembled and she hated it. He turned slowly. Under the weight of his stare, the large office suddenly felt small, intimate. "Your thesis, Ms. Rossi." His voice was even lower in here, a purr that vibrated in her bones. "It's brilliant." She blinked. It is? "The research is impeccable. The logic, flawless." He took a step closer. With every step he took, the air thickened. "But it has a fatal flaw." "A flaw? I don't understand." "You've documented the what with absolute perfection, but you've completely ignored the why." He was in front of her now, the space between them burning with an energy that made her skin prickle. "You write about these ancient power structures, these matriarchal lines, but you treat them like academic curiosities. You ignore the soul, the instinct." Her thoughts spun. Instinct isn't a measurable metric. It isn't factual. Isn't it? His lips quirked in a smile that wasn't humorous. It was predatory. "Tell me, Bianca, when you feel a storm coming before the clouds gather, is that not a fact? When an animal senses danger, is its instinct not a truth?" He leaned in, his voice dropping to a murmur. "When your heart pounds in a dark room, what does it know that your mind refuses to accept?" In that moment, she was no longer a student with her professor. She was prey, and she was terrified and thrilled. I don't," she stammered, taking a step back, her heel catching on the leg of a towering stack of books. Without warning, the tower swayed. Time stood still. Her arms flailed, papers scattering like frightened birds. She was falling. Before she could hit the floor, his arms were around her, strong and solid. He pulled her flush against his chest, her face buried in the rough tweed of his jacket. Her breath caught. She could hear the steady, powerful thump, thump, thump of his heart, a primal drumbeat that echoed in her own chest. The scent of him, ozone and ancient forests, overwhelmed her. Her body moved on instinct. She looked up. It was a mistake. His golden eyes were blazing, all academic pretense gone, replaced by a raw, hungry focus that stole the air from her lungs. As if the world narrowed to this single point in time, he lowered his head. She knew she should pull away, scream, run. And she let it happen. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a brand. A collision of lightning and fate that shattered her carefully constructed reality into a million pieces. A growl rose in her throat. Her throat. A sound she had never made, yet her soul answered it. Fire bloomed beneath her skin, and a jolt of pure, untamed energy surged through her, lighting up every nerve ending. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a claiming, an awakening, a truth her bones remembered even if her mind did not. As the silence roared, he pulled back, just enough for her to see the molten gold of his eyes. His breath was warm against her lips. Her world tilted. Something inside her shifted. And just like that, everything changed. He didn't apologize. He didn't look away. In the quiet that followed, with his hands still gripping her arms, he spoke 2 words that ended her life and started it all at once. His voice trembled, not with uncertainty, but with the weight of a century of waiting. You're home. His words, "you're home," hung in the air, heavier than stone. For a heartbeat, Bianca's mind was a white-hot void. Home? This office, smelling of predator and dust, was a cage. Home was the fortress of logic she'd built around her heart, and this man had just taken a sledgehammer to its foundations. Her body moved on instinct. A strangled sob ripped from her throat as she shoved against his chest, a wall of unyielding muscle and tweed. And then she ran. She didn't look back. She fled the office, her footsteps echoing a frantic, desperate rhythm in the hallowed, silent halls of the history department. Down the marble staircase, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Out the heavy oak doors and into the biting evening air. She didn't stop until she was leaning against the cold stone of the campus's founder's statue, the world a blurry carousel of lights and shadows around her. He hadn't followed. The thought was both a relief and, strangely, a fresh wave of terror. A madman would have chased her, right? A man lost in a delusion would have screamed after her. But then, deep down, she knew the truth. Frederick Thorne wasn't a madman. He was something else. Something far more dangerous. Because a madman was chaotic. What she'd seen in his eyes was not chaos. It was control. It was certainty. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sharp, intrusive vibration. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out. An email. Not from him, but from the university administration. The subject line, a sterile, terrifying sentence. Urgent update regarding your doctoral thesis supervision. And just like that, everything changed. Again. The email was a masterpiece of bureaucratic strangulation. It was polite. It was professional. It was a perfectly forged cage. "Dear Ms. Rossi," it began, "due to the highly specialized nature of your thesis, and in recognition of Dr. Frederick Thorne's singular world-renowned expertise in pre-Roman matriarchal factions, the academic board has unanimously approved the invocation of Provision 7.4b for projects of unique scholarly significance." Her blood ran cold. Provision 7.4b, she'd never heard of it. This provision designates Dr. Thorne as the sole qualifying advisor for the duration of your project. As a result, any and all changes to your supervisory status must be personally approved and signed off on by Dr. Thorne himself. We congratulate you on undertaking a project of such caliber. Sincerely, the Office of the Dean. Which meant she was trapped. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find a loophole. He'd done this. In the few minutes since she'd fled his office, he had somehow mobilized the highest levels of the university to lock her to him. The sheer influence it suggested was dizzying. What's worse, it was a move of chilling intelligence. He hadn't used force. He had used the very rules and systems she respected to build her prison. Her hands shook as she dialed the dean's office, but the line went straight to a placid administrative assistant. "I'm sorry, the dean is in a budgetary meeting and will be unavailable for the rest of the day. Can I take a message?" A message? What message could she possibly leave? "Hi. My advisor kissed me and called me his mate and has now trapped me in academic bondage?" They'd think she was the one who was insane. Just as she hung up, another message appeared. A text from an unknown number. "Bianca, we need to talk, not as professor and student. Meet me at the Blackwood Cafe, 8 p.m. Please." That one word, please, was the most disorienting thing of all. A command would have been simple. A threat would have been clear. But a plea? What kind of predator begs? The question hung in the air, a hook she couldn't shake. Maybe it was fate or maybe it was a terrible mistake, but she knew she had to go. Because the only way to fight a monster is to first understand the shape of it. The Blackwood Cafe was a cozy little place off campus, all warm lighting and the rich, dark scent of coffee beans. It was the last place she expected him to choose. It was normal. She chose a small booth in the back, her phone on the table, discreetly recording. When he walked in, her breath caught. He wasn't wearing his professor's armor of tweed. Instead, he wore a simple, dark sweater that made him look younger, less formal, and somehow more dangerous. The easy way he moved, the way the low chatter of the cafe seemed to quiet as he passed. People felt him. They reacted on a primal level, even if they didn't know why. He slid into the booth opposite her, and the space between them crackled. "Thank you for coming." "I didn't have a choice, did I?" She shot back, her voice colder than she felt. His golden eyes held a flicker of something that looked shockingly like pain. "I know how this looks, Bianca. Yet I am asking you to listen." He didn't mention the kiss. He didn't mention mates. He just looked at her, his gaze dropping to her wrist resting on the table. "That scar," he said, his voice a low murmur. "The crescent moon on your wrist. How long have you had it?" Her thoughts spun. "What? My whole life. It's a birthmark." "Is it?" He leaned forward and the air thickened. "Let me tell you a story my grandmother used to tell me. A myth from the old country. She said there were certain families, ancient lines whose senses were sharper. They felt the turn of the seasons in their bones and could smell a lie on a man's breath. They were tied to the world in a way others weren't." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And these families," she said, "were often marked, a sign of their heritage. Sometimes it was eyes the color of autumn gold, and sometimes it was a silver crescent moon on the inside of their wrist." Her heart skipped. It was a fairy tale, a ridiculous, transparent story designed to prey on her fears. It had to be. But then, how did he know about her senses? How could he possibly know about the way she felt storms coming? "I don't believe in myths, Doctor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I am not asking you to," he said softly. "I am asking you to believe in yourself, in what you feel. You are not simply a scholar of ancient power, Bianca. You are a descendant of it." Before either could speak, a waitress approached, her eyes wide and nervous as she looked at Frederick. She took their order for coffee with a shaking hand and scurried away. "Why are they afraid of you?" Bianca asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. For the first time, a genuine sad smile touched his lips. "Because some part of them that has nothing to do with logic or reason knows that I am not entirely a man. And that same part of you, the part that tingles on your wrist, knows something too." He didn't stay for the coffee. Moments later, he stood, leaving cash on the table. His presence lingered, a ghost of ozone and forest that clung to the air. "The book I gave you," he said as a final parting shot. "Read the chapter on protector spirits. It might resonate." And then he was gone. She sat there for a long time, the low hum of the cafe a distant buzz. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't tried to kiss her again. He had simply told her a story that made no sense, a story that explained everything. In the quiet that followed, her hand strayed to the silver mark on her wrist. It was warm to the touch. Sleep was a distant country she couldn't reach. Come morning, the sun streamed through her apartment window, but it brought no warmth. Instead, it only illuminated the book lying on her desk, its leather cover seeming to absorb the light. It felt less like an academic text and more like a judgment waiting to be read. The chapter he'd mentioned, Protector Spirits. What a load of manipulative, theatrical nonsense. Yet she couldn't get his words out of her head. The story about the crescent moon mark, the description of heightened senses. It was all designed to prey on her, she knew. It was a classic psychological tactic. So she would read it. She would read it and dismantle his absurd argument piece by piece with her own superior logic. That's why she finally reached for it. The paper was old, brittle, and smelled of vanilla and dust. The text was a translation from an older dialect, but the words were clear. "The protector spirit," she read, "is not a ghost, but a guardian bound by blood and fate to a mortal line. He is a wolf in man's skin, a creature of primal instinct and unyielding loyalty. His coming is not summoned, but awakened by a catalyst, a moment when the life of his charge is irrevocably altered, forcing his own dormant nature to rise in their defense. Her breath hitched, a wolf in man's skin. A shiver, cold and sharp, traced its way down her spine. The presence of an awakened protector is a palpable force. His senses are so keen he can hear a secret whispered a room away, and his aura is one of such dominance that mundane animals and lesser men are instinctively cowed by his presence. Bianca thought of the nervous waitress, the way the students in his lecture hall sat in utter reverent silence. It was a coincidence. It had to be. With a trembling finger, she read the next section, the one about the protector's other half. The charge, or the soulbound, carries the anchor of their shared lineage. They too will feel the bond's awakening. Their own senses will sharpen in harmony with their guardian. They will feel an inexplicable magnetic pull to their protector, a feeling of both profound safety and terrifying intensity. And they will often bear the sigil of their ancient line, a mark of their soul's covenant, a crescent moon of silver upon their skin. The book slipped from her fingers, falling to the floor with a soft thud. Her hand flew to her wrist, to the faint silvery scar that was suddenly, impossibly, tingling with a life of its own. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden suffocating silence of the room. It wasn't a story. It wasn't a myth. It was her. And just as that horrifying thought took root, she heard it. A sound from outside her second-story window, a low, deliberate scratch like claws dragging against brick. Before she could move, her body went rigid, every muscle screaming. Her hearing, once a normal, blurry thing, was now a razor-sharp weapon. It focused on the sound, dissecting it. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't an animal. The rhythm was too steady, too patient. As if pulled by a string, she crept towards the window, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She peered through a tiny gap in the blinds, her world narrowing to the slice of the street below. And she saw him. He was standing under a flickering street lamp, bathed in its sickly orange glow. He was a silhouette of broad shoulders and coiled tension. Not Frederick. Not the men from the jogging trail. This was someone new. He was just standing there, his head tilted up towards her window as if he could see right through the walls, as if he were sniffing the air. The sheer, predatory stillness of him made the hairs on her arms stand on end. As the silence stretched, he moved. He lifted his head, and in the dim light, his lips curled back from his teeth in a smile that held no humor at all. It was a snarl, a promise of violence. Then, without another word, he melted back into the inky shadows between the buildings and was gone. But he had been there. She wasn't crazy. She knew what she saw. The Watcher was real. This danger was real. Her phone, forgotten on the desk, suddenly buzzed, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the still apartment. She jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. It was the same unknown number as before. This time the message was only one word. Run. Run? The command was absurd. Run where? To whom? The police? What would she tell them? There was a man standing outside my apartment who smiled at me funny. They would dismiss her in a heartbeat. Her thoughts spun, a chaotic cyclone of fear and disbelief. The Watcher outside, the book full of impossible truths, the text message on her phone. Was the message from the Watcher, or was it from someone else? Someone warning her? Her mind, her beautiful, logical, academic mind, was failing her. It offered no solutions, only more questions. It kept screaming that werewolves weren't real, that this was all an elaborate, cruel prank. But her body knew better. Her pulse was a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. Her skin was electric with terror. Her instincts, the very ones she had spent her entire life suppressing, were screaming a single, undeniable truth. You are being hunted. And in that moment, she was faced with the question that had been haunting her. Can you trust what you feel over what you know? Her knowledge was useless. It was a shield made of paper against a storm of claws and teeth. Her feelings, however, her terror was real. The feeling of safety she'd felt in Frederick's arms, that was real too. He was a monster, maybe. But the book didn't call him a monster. It called him a protector. With a sob that was half terror, half surrender, she made a choice. She snatched her keys, her phone, and the damning, terrifying book from the floor. She wasn't just going to run. She was going to run to the only person who might have answers. The only person who felt less like a threat and more like a shield. Her fingers shook so badly she could barely dial the unknown number from the text messages. She pressed the phone to her ear, listening to the dial tone, each ring an eternity. He answered on the first. His voice wasn't the calm, measured tone of a professor. It was a low, urgent growl, stripped of all pretense. "Where are you?" "My apartment," she choked out, her voice a raw whisper. "There was a man outside. I think he's one of them." A string of curses, low and guttural, came through the phone. Then his voice was pure command, a bedrock of authority in her sea of fear. "Stay there. Lock the door. Do not move from that spot." As the truth unraveled, she heard the sound of a powerful engine roaring to life in the background. "I'm coming!" The line went dead, leaving her in the roaring silence of her apartment, clutching a book of myths that was her life story, waiting for one monster to save her from another. The silence in her apartment was a living thing, a predator waiting in the corners of the room. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, was a promise of violence. Bianca stood frozen in the middle of her living room, phone clutched in a death grip. Her entire world shrunk to a single terrifying command. "Stay there. I'm coming." She didn't know how long she waited. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. Her heightened hearing was a curse, cataloging every rustle of leaves and scrape of metal from the street below. Was it him? Was it the Watcher? Who was the savior and who was the beast? Then she heard it. Not a stealthy approach, but the deep, throaty roar of a powerful engine tearing through the quiet residential streets. It was a sound of pure, unapologetic dominance. A dark, sleek car, a machine built for speed and power, screamed to a halt directly in front of her building. Moments later, heavy, purposeful footsteps echoed in the apartment building's hallway. They stopped outside her door. There was no knock, just a heavy, expectant silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic prisoner. Before she could move, his voice came through the wood, low and resonant, a vibration she felt in her bones. "Bianca, open the door." As if pulled by a string, she did. He filled the doorway, a storm of dark energy and raw authority. The kind, patient professor was gone, erased completely. In his place stood the Alpha. His golden eyes weren't warm. They were hard, sharp, and assessing, sweeping her apartment in a single, comprehensive glance that missed nothing. He stepped inside, and the air crackled, charged with his presence. He walked directly to the window where she'd seen the Watcher, his body moving with a fluid, predatory grace. His nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. "He was here," he growled, the sound a low rumble of thunder. "One of Marcus's dogs. I can smell his pathetic desperation all over the street." He turned back to her, his gaze pinning her in place. "You can't stay here tonight. You can't stay here ever again." "What? I can't just leave my whole—" "You can. And you will." He cut her off, his authority absolute. "Go and pack a bag, clothes, toiletries, your laptop. Nothing else. You have 5 minutes." Because of that, she found herself moving, her limbs feeling strangely disconnected from her brain. This was insane. She was packing a bag in the middle of the night on the orders of a man who thought he was a werewolf. Yet, deep down, she knew the truth. Her life depended on obeying him. As she threw clothes into a duffel bag, he moved through her small living room, his gaze landing on the book she'd dropped. He bent down and picked it up. His jaw tightened. "You read it." It wasn't a question. "It described you," she whispered, the words feeling like a confession. It described me. It described the truth, he corrected, his voice rough. He tossed the book onto her bed. Bring it. Your lessons are just beginning. 4 minutes. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the marrow, that her old life, the one of footnotes and logic, was already gone. She was just now packing up its ghost. The car was a black cage hurtling through the night. The city lights of her home, of her entire world, blurred and then vanished in the rearview mirror. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with unspoken questions. Bianca stared out the window as the neat suburban streets gave way to winding country roads, flanked by the looming skeletal shapes of ancient trees. They were heading into the wilderness. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked, her voice small. "Somewhere safe," he replied, his eyes fixed on the road. "Somewhere Marcus can't reach you." Marcus. She said the name, tasting it. The man from the lecture, the watcher. Why is he doing this? Why is he after me? Frederick was silent for a long moment, the only sound the powerful hum of the engine. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, laced with a bitterness that felt centuries old. "Because in our world, power is everything. It's territory, it's legacy. And I hold the oldest territory in this region, the Northwood lands. Marcus is new money, a brute who built his pack through violence and intimidation. He wants what I have, what my father had before me." He glanced at her, and in the fleeting glow of the dashboard lights, his eyes were filled with a terrible ancient sorrow. "For years, I've had no weakness. I was solitary. But then, you happened." Her breath caught. "To them," he continued, his voice a low growl, "an alpha's fated mate, especially one who is unclaimed and unaware, is not a person. She is a pawn, a vulnerability, a political tool to provoke a war." He reached across the console, his fingers brushing against her hand. A jolt, hot and fierce, shot up her arm. "He thinks you are my weakness, Bianca." His hand enveloped hers, his grip surprisingly gentle, yet unbreakably firm. "He's wrong," he murmured, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of her palm. "You are not my weakness. You are everything else." As if on cue, his phone rang, the sound shrill and violent in the confined space. He answered, his voice shifting instantly back to that of a commander. "Report." A pause. "How many? Are they armed?" Another pause, his knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. "Hold the perimeter. No one gets in or out. I'm bringing her in." He hung up, the car accelerating into a sharp curve. "Bringing me in where?" she asked, her voice trembling. He pointed ahead. Through the trees, nestled in a valley below, she could see a scattering of lights. Not a town, but a collection of large, sprawling estates, their lights like fallen stars in the deep, dark woods. "Home," he said, "to my pack." And his words confirmed her deepest fear. She wasn't just a pawn in a game. She was being brought to the chessboard. The gates were 10 feet of imposing black wrought iron, decorated with a subtle motif of a howling wolf. They slid open without a sound as they approached, revealing a long, winding drive. Figures melted out of the shadows of the massive pine trees, 2 men and a woman all moving with the same silent, fluid grace as Frederick. They weren't armed with guns. They didn't need to be. Their very presence was a weapon. The woman stepped forward as Frederick got out of the car. She was tall, with sharp features and hair the color of midnight. Her eyes, a piercing, intelligent gray, scanned Bianca from head to toe. There was no welcome in them, only a cool, cautious assessment. "Elara," Frederick greeted her with a nod. "Any trouble?" "They sent a scout to the western border." "He didn't get far," she replied, her voice crisp. Her gaze flickered back to Bianca, and a hint of something, disapproval, skepticism, crossed her face. "So this is her?" "This is her," Frederick confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. He opened Bianca's door. "Come." He led her towards the house, a stunning piece of modern architecture built from dark stone and massive wooden beams that seemed to have grown out of the forest itself. It was both a fortress and a work of art. Inside, the air was warm, smelling of wood smoke and pine. He led her through a great room with a cavernous fireplace and up a wide, sweeping staircase. He stopped outside a heavy wooden door. "This will be your room. You will be safe here." He turned to face her, his expression grim. "But there are rules now, Bianca. You do not leave this house, not without me. You do not open your door to anyone but me or Alara. My scent, my claim, is layered over every inch of this property. It is a warning, a magical barrier. Marcus will not be able to cross it himself, but his followers will test it. They will look for any weakness." Her heart skipped. Magical barrier. The words were spoken with such casual certainty. "I understand," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she did. "Good." He opened the door, revealing a beautiful, spacious room with a roaring fireplace and a large bed that looked impossibly soft. It was a luxurious sanctuary. She stepped inside, her duffel bag feeling foolish and small in her hand. He started to close the door, his golden eyes locking with hers one last time. For a moment, she saw the flicker of regret, of the professor he used to be. "For your protection, Bianca," he said softly. Then he closed the door, and in the sudden, heavy silence of the beautiful room, she heard the unmistakable, soul-chilling click of a heavy deadbolt sliding into place on the outside. He had locked her in, a prisoner in a gilded cage. The morning sun was a liar. It streamed through the magnificent arched window of her room, promising a new day, but the cold, hard reality was in the silence. It was the silence of a tomb, punctuated only by the heavy, ominous click she had heard last night, the sound of the deadbolt. She was a guest in a beautiful room, a prisoner in a fortress of stone and secrets. The feeling of safety she'd clung to in the car had evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind the bitter residue of captivity. A soft knock came at the door, followed by the sound of the bolt sliding back. The woman from last night, Ilara, entered carrying a tray. Her movements were efficient, her face a mask of cool neutrality. She set down the tray laden with eggs, fruit, and coffee. "The Alpha instructed me to see to your needs," she said, her voice as crisp and cold as the morning air. "The Alpha," Bianca repeated, the word tasting strange and foreign. "You mean Frederick?" Alara's gray eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "He is our Alpha. He is responsible for the safety of this entire pack." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Bianca with an unnerving intensity. "He has not been himself since he found you. This focus on one person above all others is a distraction. With Marcus at our borders, it is a distraction we cannot afford." The message was clear. Bianca wasn't just a guest, she was a problem, a weakness, a complication that could get them all killed. After Alara left, locking the door behind her once more, Bianca paced the room like a caged wolf. The injustice of it all burned in her chest. A pawn, a vulnerability, a distraction. She would not be defined by what she was to others. She would define herself. Her gaze fell upon her laptop and the ancient, leather-bound book she'd brought. Without another thought, she flung herself into the chair, the fire of defiance replacing the cold chill of fear. If they saw her as a problem, she would become the solution. She would not wait for protection. She would arm herself with knowledge. She opened her laptop, the screen illuminating her determined face. On one side, she pulled up the financial records and property deeds she'd found on Marcus. On the other, she opened the digital photos she'd taken of the book's pages. She began to work, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She cross-referenced ancient pack laws with modern corporate loopholes, compared mythological migration patterns to Marcus's land acquisitions. Her mind, her greatest weapon, was finally unleashed. This was her battleground. Hours later, the lock clicked again. Frederick stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He stopped short, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the scene. She wasn't huddled in a corner crying. She was at the center of a web of data, her eyes blazing with an intensity that matched his own. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of surprise. "This," she said, not looking up from her screen, "is how I fight." He moved deeper into the room, drawn by the sheer force of her concentration. He looked over her shoulder, his scent of pine and storm wrapping around her, a strangely comforting distraction. On her screen was a complex flowchart, linking shell corporations and offshore accounts to a single recurring name. "You're tracking his money," he stated, a note of awe in his voice. "I set my best men to tracking his physical movements. It never occurred to me to track his wealth. His pack is large, they move aggressively, that requires resources," she explained, pointing to a highlighted line item. "Huge, unexplained cash infusions, all from the same source. An investment firm based in Romania, Lupus International. It doesn't feel like a coincidence, does it?" He was silent for a long moment, studying her work. "My father," he began, his voice suddenly quiet and vulnerable. "He was a great alpha, strong, honorable. He believed in the old ways, tradition over tactics." He leaned against the desk, the weight of a painful memory settling on him. 20 years ago, a rival challenged him. My father met him on the field of honor, wolf against wolf. But the rival had spent months buying the loyalty of our suppliers, cutting off our resources, turning our human allies against us with lies. My father won the battle, but he almost lost the war before it even began. Because he was fighting a wolf and not the man controlling it. In that moment, she saw past the alpha, past the professor, and saw the son. A man haunted by a past failure, determined not to repeat it. That's why he was so controlling. That's why he fought with strategy as much as strength. "I won't make his mistake," he murmured, his eyes locking with hers. The respect in his gaze was a more potent aphrodisiac than any kiss. As if drawn by the same invisible string, they both leaned in, the world shrinking to the space between them. But just as their lips were about to meet, the door to her room burst open, slamming against the wall. Elara stood there, her cool composure shattered, her face pale with alarm. "Alpha!" she gasped, her chest heaving. "We have a problem. It's the university." Frederick was on his feet in an instant, the Alpha once more. "What is it?" "They've taken one of ours," she said, the words a death sentence. "A young patrol wolf, snatched him right off the edge of campus. It was Marcus's men. They left his sigil." A cold, hard fury radiated from Frederick, so powerful it felt like a physical force in the room. "On neutral ground," he snarled, his voice a low, guttural threat. "He broke the accord. He's trying to force my hand." "It's a trap," Bianca said immediately, standing up, her heart pounding. The data on her screen suddenly felt terrifyingly real. "It has to be. He's trying to draw you out, away from here." "She's right, Alpha," Elara agreed, her earlier skepticism of Bianca forgotten in the face of the crisis. "This is too brazen. He wants you isolated." Frederick stalked to the window, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He stared out into the forest, his jaw tight. "If I don't answer this challenge, I show weakness. I abandon one of my own. The pack will see it as cowardice. He'll have won a major victory without a single drop of blood." "So what are you going to do?" Bianca whispered, her voice trembling. He turned back, and the raw agony in his eyes stole her breath. He was caught between honor and strategy, between his duty as an alpha and his need to protect her. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, framing her face with his hands. "This is my fault," he murmured, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "I brought this danger to you." "No," she said, her own hands coming up to cover his. "We fight it together." His eyes blazed with a fierce, desperate light. And then he kissed her. It was nothing like the first time. There was no shock, no claiming. This was a kiss of raw, desperate passion. It was the taste of fear and fury, of love and impending loss. It was a promise to return and a plea to be remembered. It was everything they couldn't say, poured into one breathtaking, soul-searing moment. Her entire body ignited, her wolf, her soul, whatever he had awakened in her, rising to meet his passion with a ferocity that was her own. He pulled away, his breathing ragged. "Ilara," he commanded, never taking his eyes off Bianca. "Lock this house down. Arm the patrol. No one gets in." "Alpha." Ilara hesitated. "No one," he repeated, the order absolute. He gave Bianca one last, lingering look, a look that said, "Wait for me." And then he was gone, striding from the room with his warriors at his heels. Bianca rushed to the window, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She watched as he and a small group of his pack members piled into their dark vehicles and sped away down the long drive, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. She was left behind with the skeptical Ilara in a house that was now a fortress. But as the sound of the engines faded and a heavy, oppressive silence fell over the estate, the beautiful house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a target, and the bait had just been left alone. The silence was the worst part. After Frederick left, a heavy, unnatural quiet fell over the fortress-like house. It was the silence of a held breath, of a world waiting for an axe to fall. Bianca stood at the great window, her hand pressed against the cold glass, watching the spot where his car had vanished into the oppressive darkness of the forest. Beside her, Ilara stood ramrod straight, her jaw tight, her thumb scrolling endlessly through the contacts on her phone, searching for updates that never came. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was a hammer blow against Bianca's nerves. "They should have checked in by now," Ilara murmured, her voice tight with a strain she couldn't quite conceal. "The patrol on the South Ridge is disciplined, they always report." As if her words were a curse, the lights in the great room flickered once, twice, and then died. The entire house plunged into an inky blackness. A moment later, emergency lights kicked in, casting long dancing shadows across the walls, turning the beautiful room into a cavern of looming, monstrous shapes. "The power," Bianca whispered, her heart seizing in her chest. "It's not the grid," Ilara said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. She was already moving, her earlier skepticism replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a warrior. "They cut the main line. The backup generator should have kicked." She was cut off by a sound from outside, a soft, rhythmic thump, and another, all around the house. It wasn't the sound of an attack, it was the sound of bodies landing softly on the grass. They were being surrounded. Without warning, Bianca's head snapped towards the floor. Her heightened hearing, a constant, low-grade hum in her mind, suddenly sharpened to a razor's edge. "No," she breathed, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. "Not just outside." Ilara looked at her, confused. "What?" "Listen," Bianca insisted, pointing towards the stone floor. "Under us, there's a scratching sound, from the basement." Ilara's face went pale. At the same time, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She read it, and a string of curses fell from her lips, each one a bitter, furious puff of air. She showed the screen to Bianca. The message was from a guard on the estate's outer perimeter. "They're not just outside, they're under us. Old service tunnels." Before the words could even register, another sound made both their blood run cold. From the front of the house came the loud metallic groan of the main gate sliding open. They were being let in. They raced to a small security monitor near the kitchen, its screen glowing eerily on its battery backup. Ilara tapped the screen, switching the view to the front gate camera. The image that flickered to life was a portrait of pure betrayal. One of Frederick's own men, a trusted guard named Liam, was at the control panel, his face a mask of grim determination as he held the gate open. As they watched, a dozen dark figures, Marcus's wolves, poured onto the property. "Liam," Ilara choked out, her voice thick with disbelief and rage. "I should have known. He was always too ambitious, too eager for a shortcut to power." "Truth be told," It all made a horrifying kind of sense. The cut power lines, the knowledge of the old tunnels. Marcus hadn't just exploited Frederick's honor, he had cultivated a cancer within the Northwood pack itself. The fortress was breached from the inside. A deafening crash echoed from the great room as the massive oak doors began to splinter under a coordinated assault. The house, their sanctuary, was falling. "There's no time," Elara snarled, grabbing Bianca's arm with a grip of iron. Her cool disdain was gone, replaced by a fierce, desperate fire. She was no longer guarding a problem, she was protecting her alpha's mate. She dragged Bianca towards a tapestry hanging on the wall, one depicting a great black wolf howling at the moon. Ripping it aside, she revealed a narrow, hidden doorway. "The Alpha's emergency tunnel," she commanded, shoving Bianca towards the dark opening. "It leads a mile into the forest, to the old hunting cabin. Run. Do you understand me? You do not look back. You do not stop for anything. He will find you." "Elara, I can't just leave you." "Yes, you can." Elara shoved her again, harder this time. "My life is sworn to this pack, to him. His life is sworn to you. Now go!" As Bianca stumbled into the darkness of the tunnel, she took one last look back. The front doors of the house exploded inward in a shower of splintered wood. And in the doorway stood Elara, her back straight, a wicked-looking curved blade now in each of her hands. She stood alone, a final, defiant shield against the incoming tide of snarling, shadowy figures. And with a warrior's cry, she charged forward to buy Bianca time with her life. The forest was a nightmare of tangled roots and whipping branches. Bianca ran, her lungs burning, a raw sob lodged in her throat. The tunnel had led out into the deep woods, and now she was lost, alone, and being hunted. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl, was the sound of approaching death. She was no longer a scholar. She was just an animal, fleeing for its life. She burst through a thicket of ferns and stumbled into a small, circular clearing, bathed in the cold, ethereal light of the full moon. For a single beautiful second, she thought she was safe. But then, a voice, dripping with smug satisfaction, echoed from the trees. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Marcus stepped out from behind an ancient oak, a predator revealing himself at the end of a successful hunt. He was not alone. 2 other large, menacing figures flanked him. He looked her up and down, his smile a cruel, triumphant slash in the moonlight. Frederick is so sentimental, so bound by honor. Luring him away with a single pathetic pup was almost too easy. He never even considered that the prize was never at the university. His eyes gleamed. "The prize was always you, little mate." He lunged. Time seemed to warp and stretch. She saw his hand reaching for her, his fingers curled like talons. And then, a blur of black fury slammed into him from the side, sending him tumbling to the forest floor. Frederick. He was here. He was snarling, his clothes torn, a bleeding gash on his shoulder. But he was here. He must have realized the trap, must have doubled back. He was too late to save the house, but he was here for her. The 2 other men instantly shifted, their bodies contorting into the massive forms of wolves. Without hesitation, Frederick met them, the change ripping through him, his human form dissolving into that of the great black wolf she'd seen once before. The battle was a whirlwind of savage, guttural snarls and the sickening crunch of bone. He was magnificent. He was terrifying. But he was injured, and he was outnumbered. One of Marcus's wolves got past his guard, its jaws clamping down on his leg. Frederick roared in pain, and in that moment of distraction, Marcus, now in his own monstrous wolf form, slammed into him, pinning him to the ground. Defeated. Her world tilted. Her protector, her alpha, was pinned beneath his rival, blood matron his black fur. Elara was gone. The house was gone. All hope was gone. Marcus, his wolf form heaving, slowly turned his head. His glowing, malevolent eyes, filled with triumph and bloodlust, locked onto her. He took a stalking step towards her. Then another, and her mind, the logical, rational, academic mind that had been her only sanctuary for her entire life, finally broke. The terror was too big. The loss was too absolute. A scream started in her throat, but it wasn't a human sound. It was a raw, animalistic howl of pure agony and rage. The world went red. A searing, white-hot pain erupted in her spine, a fire that spread through every bone in her body. She fell to her knees, her body convulsing as something ancient and powerful, something she had denied her entire life, clawed its way out. Her bones snapped, her skin stretched. The last thing she saw with her human eyes was Frederick's own golden wolf eyes widening in shock and horror. Then, there was only the pain, the moonlight, and the monster being born. Pain. It was the only universe, a symphony of agony conducted in every nerve ending, every tearing muscle, every snapping bone. Bianca's world, once a neat library of facts and logic, had been reduced to a single, screaming sensation. In the red haze of her dissolving consciousness, she was vaguely aware of the forest, of the scent of blood and pine, of the two great beasts locked in a war for her soul. Frederick was down. The other one, the hunter, was stalking toward her, and the monster inside her was clawing its way out. Marcus, in his massive wolf form, paused. He watched her writhing form on the forest floor, his head cocked with a flicker of arrogant curiosity. This was an unexpected prize, a latent wolf. He took a half-step forward, his victory assured, savoring the moment. That half-step was his mistake. A roar of pure, desperate fury erupted from beneath him. Frederick, fueled by the sight of Bianca's agonizing transformation, found a last impossible reserve of alpha strength. With a mighty heave, he threw the wolf, pinning his leg aside, and scrambled to his feet, placing his injured body between Marcus and Bianca. But before their battle could resume, a new presence flooded the clearing. Without warning, shadows detached themselves from the surrounding trees. They were wolves, at least a half-dozen of them, moving with a silent, disciplined grace that made Marcus's brutes look like clumsy pups. They were led by a massive, grizzled wolf whose gray-streaked fur seemed to drink the moonlight. His eyes were not gold, but a startling, intelligent ice blue. They did not attack. They simply appeared, forming a perfect, silent circle around the combatants. The air crackled with a new, ancient authority. The grizzled wolf took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The injured Frederick, the snarling Marcus, and finally the convulsing, half-shifted form of Bianca on the ground. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound like stones grinding together. It was not a threat. It was a judgment. The new wolf, Silas, was an enforcer of the old laws, his pack the neutral arbiters of disputes that threatened to shatter the regional peace. He had been drawn by the scent of a broken accord, and more potently, the scent of a power not felt in this forest for 500 years, the awakening of a silver moon omega. "This challenge is void," a voice echoed, not in their ears, but directly in their minds, a powerful alpha command that transcended spoken words. Silas was speaking to them all. "You," his mental gaze fell on Marcus, "have broken the law. You attacked on claimed territory after a false summons. You targeted an unawakened soul. You have shamed yourself and your pack." Marcus snarled, but it was a sound of defiance, not dominance. "This is not over." Silas's voice boomed in their heads, his authority absolute. "It will be settled, by the ancient laws. At the rise of the next full moon, in this clearing, you will face each other in a sanctioned duel. The winner takes all, the loser forfeits everything." His piece said. He gave a sharp mental command, and his wolves began to herd Marcus and his remaining followers back into the forest, their retreat a bitter, resentful one. As Marcus disappeared, Bianca's agonizing transformation finally completed. With a last shuddering sigh, her body settled into the form of a wolf, one smaller and more slender than the others, with a coat the color of fresh silver. And then, her new body giving out, she collapsed into the soft loam of the forest floor unconscious. Frederick, limping and bleeding, shifted back into his human form, stumbling to her side. He gathered her up, his heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. Silas, the old enforcer, gave him a final parting look. His mental voice was softer now, tinged with something like awe as he gazed at the silver wolf in Frederick's arms. "Guard her well, Northwood Alpha. You have no idea what you have just found." She awoke to the scent of antiseptic and sandalwood. Her body ached with the ghost of a pain so vast she couldn't comprehend it. She was human again, lying in the enormous, comfortable bed in Frederick's room. He was sitting in a chair beside her, his arm in a sling, his face etched with exhaustion and worry. The moment her eyes opened, he was there, his hand finding hers. "Bianca," he breathed, his voice thick with relief. What happened?" she whispered, her own voice feeling foreign in her throat. "So," he told her. He told her everything. About the arrival of Silas, the enforcer, about the voided challenge and the new final ultimatum, a sanctioned duel in 1 month's time, winner take all. He explained that her transformation, her agony, had created the single moment of distraction that had saved them both. She pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest, and looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. It was her face, but her eyes. For a split second, she could have sworn they glowed with an inner golden light. She felt different. The world seemed louder, smells were sharper, and a low hum of energy coursed just beneath her skin. The wolf was a part of her now. "Why?" she asked, the question a raw ache. Why was my change so important to them? Frederick took a deep breath. "Because of who you are, Bianca. Your birthmark, the crescent moon. It is the sigil of the silver moon omegas." He went to his desk and retrieved a crumbling ancient book, not the one he had given her, but one far older. He opened it to a page showing a delicate silver-penciled drawing of a woman with a wolf at her side. "The silver moon line was thought to be extinct," he explained, his voice filled with reverence. "They weren't alphas, bred for rule, or betas, bred for war. They were something else. Seers, counselors. Their true power wasn't physical. It was a deep, instinctual wisdom, a psychic influence that could soothe an alpha's rage or shatter a rival's focus with a wave of pure, calming energy. They were kingmakers, Bianca. A silver moon omega at an alpha's side made his pack unbeatable." The horrifying truth of it all slammed into her, the final piece of the puzzle. "He doesn't just want your territory," she said, her voice a low, chilling whisper of revelation. "He wants me. He wants to kill you and use me to control your pack." The month that followed was a blur of pain, discovery, and relentless preparation. The shadow of the duel hung over every moment. Frederick, despite his own healing injuries, became her patient, tireless teacher. He didn't teach her to fight. He took her deep into the forest and taught her to be. To listen to the wind, to feel the life in the earth beneath her feet, to recognize the individual heartbeats of his pack members. He taught her how to center herself, how to find the quiet place between the woman and the wolf. In these quiet moments, their bond deepened into something more profound than passion. It became a partnership forged in trust and mutual respect. Meanwhile, Bianca waged her own war. She spent every spare moment in his library, devouring ancient texts about her lineage. She read accounts of silver moon omegas who had turned the tide of battles not with their claws, but with their minds. They could project feelings of calm, or, more potently, amplify an enemy's own inner chaos until their rage consumed them. At the same time, she continued her digital war against Marcus, digging deeper, looking for a weakness. And she found it. A footnote in a rival pack's history, detailing a duel from a century ago. It mentioned that the loser, a hot-headed alpha from the Vance line, Marcus's line, had a bizarre, violent reaction to the scent of wolfsbane, not just as a poison, but as a psychic irritant that drove him into a blind, unfocused rage. the two ideas clicked together in her mind, a spark of brilliant, dangerous hope. That night, she laid out the plan for Frederick. It was a desperate, two-pronged assault. "You won't be fighting him alone," she explained, her eyes blazing with a newfound confidence. "While you face him physically, I'll be on the edge of the clearing. I'll use what you've taught me. I will project calm towards you, and I will project every bit of his own rage and aggression right back at him. And Alara," she said, looking at the now loyal Beta, "will be burning wolfsbane at the tree line, letting the wind carry the scent. We won't just fight his body, we will break his mind." The night of the full moon arrived, cold and clear. The air in the clearing crackled with tension. Marcus and his wolves stood on one side, Frederick's pack on the other. In the center, Silas, the enforcer, stood as a silent witness. Frederick turned to Bianca. He no longer looked at her as a fragile human to be sheltered. He looked at her as his partner, his secret weapon, his queen. "Ready?" he asked, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. She met his gaze, her own eyes steady, a calm, certain power humming beneath her skin. A flicker of pure gold shone in their depths. "Let's end this," she replied. The full moon was a cold silver eye in the black sky, the only witness to the ancient rite about to unfold. In the center of the clearing, Silas, the enforcer, stood as still as a stone monument. He raised his head and let out a single sharp howl that was not a call to war, but a signal, a declaration. The time for words was over. The duel began. With a simultaneous guttural snarl, Frederick and Marcus exploded into motion, their human forms shredding away into the magnificent, terrifying shapes of their wolves. Marcus was a beast of raw, brutalist power, a whirlwind of gray fur and snarling teeth. Frederick was a creature of dark, fluid grace, a shadow of black fur against the pale grass. They crashed together in the center of the clearing with a sound like thunder, a maelstrom of claws and fury. Initially, Marcus's younger, more savage aggression gave him the advantage. He was relentless, a battering ram of pure rage, landing a deep scratch along Frederick's flank and another on his shoulder. Frederick was forced back, his movements defensive, calculated. To the watching packs, it looked as if their alpha was being overpowered. A ripple of fear went through the Northwood wolves. But on the edge of the clearing, Bianca closed her eyes. She shut out the sounds of the fight, the panicked whispers of the pack. She reached out with her mind, with the new strange sense her awakened blood had given her. The world dissolved, replaced by two burning suns of pure emotion. One was Frederick, a controlled, focused fire of determination and pain. The other was Marcus, a raging, chaotic inferno of blinding aggression and ego. At the tree line, a faint, acrid smoke began to drift on the breeze as Alara lit the hidden braziers of wolfsbane. And Bianca began her work. She didn't try to fight the inferno. She simply opened a door in her mind. She gathered all the seething, hateful rage pouring off Marcus, and with a focused push of her will, she fed it right back into him. "More," she whispered in his mind without speaking a word. "You are rage. You are fury. Let it consume you." At the same time, she reached for Frederick's steady flame. She wrapped it in a feeling of pure, grounding calm. A silent message of, "I am here. You are not alone. I am your anchor." The effect was immediate. Marcus, his senses already irritated by the scent of wolfsbane, suddenly faltered. His calculated aggression, amplified by his own reflected rage, boiled over into a blind, sloppy fury. He was no longer a duelist, he was just a rabid animal lunging wildly, his attacks powerful but clumsy, leaving him wide open. Frederick, feeling the steadying calm wash over him and seeing the shift in his opponent, seized the moment. The tide of the battle turned in the span of a breath. He was no longer just defending. He ducked under a wild, snapping lunge, his powerful shoulders slamming into Marcus's side. He twisted, using Marcus's own momentum against him. With a final, decisive move, he outmaneuvered the enraged, confused beast. He surged forward, his black form a blur of focused power, and slammed Marcus to the ground. The clearing fell silent. Frederick stood over his defeated rival, his teeth bared, his jaws inches from Marcus's throat. Victory. He held the pose for a long, heavy moment, the victor. But instead of delivering the killing bite, he slowly, deliberately, looked up. He looked past the stunned packs, past the silent enforcer, and his golden wolf eyes found Bianca's. He held her gaze, asking a single silent question. What is our justice? The silence of the clearing was absolute, broken only by the ragged, defeated panting of the wolf pinned to the ground. All eyes, wolf and human, were on their victorious alpha. Frederick held his dominance for another moment, before slowly stepping back. As he did, he shifted, the powerful form of the wolf melting away, leaving the man, naked and bleeding, but standing tall in the moonlight. Marcus, shamed and defeated, reverted to his human form as well, curled on the ground in a pathetic heap. "The law of the duel is clear," Frederick's voice boomed, filled with an authority that left no room for question. "But my justice is not an execution." He looked at Marcus with a cold, final pity. "You are stripped of your name. You are stripped of your alpha status. You are exiled from these lands, you and any who still claim loyalty to your dishonorable cause. You will be given one day's head start. If you are ever scented in this territory again, my wolves will not be so merciful." He then turned to the remaining leaderless members of Marcus's pack. "For the rest of you, you have a choice. Swear your fealty to the Northwood Pack tonight and you will be given a place, or follow your broken leader into exile. Choose." Silas, the grizzled enforcer, stepped forward and nodded once, a gesture of profound approval. A just ruling, Alpha Thorne, a wise one. But Frederick wasn't finished. He turned away from the scene of his victory, his gaze finding Bianca at the edge of the forest. He walked towards her, ignoring his own injuries, his pack watching in silence. He took her hand, his touch warm and sure, and gently pulled her forward out of the shadows and into the center of the moonlit clearing to stand beside him. He faced his pack, his voice ringing with pride. "This victory," he declared, raising their joined hands, "was not won by my strength alone. It was won by the wisdom, the strategy, and the power of your Luna." One by one, the stunned and awed members of the Northwood Pack lowered their heads. It was a gesture of deference, of loyalty, and of absolute respect. They were not just bowing to their alpha. They were bowing to them both. 2 weeks later, the silence in the house was no longer one of tension, but one of deep, abiding peace. Bianca sat curled in a large armchair in the library, the fire crackling merrily in the hearth. The door was wide open. An old book of lore rested in her lap, but she was mostly just watching the flames dance. Ilara entered, not with the stiff formality of a guard, but with the easy grace of a friend. She handed Bianca a steaming mug of tea. "The last of Marcus's pack swore fealty this morning," she reported with a satisfied smile. "Liam is being dealt with. You were right about them. A little loyalty goes a long way." "Everyone just wants a home," Bianca said softly, and she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that she had finally found hers. Ilara nodded and left her in peace. A few moments later, a familiar warmth enveloped her from behind. Frederick wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder as he watched the fire with her. She leaned back against his solid, comforting presence. There was no need for words. Their shared silence was a conversation all its own. "I was looking at your thesis proposal earlier," he murmured into her hair, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "It's still brilliant." She smiled. "It's incomplete." "Oh?" "It needs a new final chapter," she said, turning her head to kiss his cheek. "One about practical application." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the room. I think the university will find your field research to be unparalleled. He gently took the book from her lap and set it aside, pulling her to her feet. He led her out onto the grand stone balcony adjoining the library, the cool night air a soft caress on her skin. Below them, the lights of the pack houses glittered in the valley, like a constellation they had built themselves, their pack, their home. He turned her to face him, his golden eyes soft and filled with a love so deep and profound it was a physical thing. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not the shocking kiss of a fated claiming, nor the desperate kiss of a warrior going to battle. It was the slow, easy, lingering kiss of a partner, of an equal, of a man who had finally, truly come home.